I live here in a part of North Texas that frequently gets tornadoes. The first dozen times that we got tornadoes, it scared me to death. But by now, I pretty much know the drill when it happens. Go straight to the basement, across the yard, and get down there and get as deep in the back as you can. But during this night, the tornado wasn't the scary part. My parents and I were eating dinner late one night when we noticed the TV switched from our show that we were watching to an immediate tornado warning. Mom and Dad threw down their forks and jumped up from the table and grabbed me by the shirt and said, "You know the drill." We ran out of the house and across the yard. On our way to the basement, we could see the tornado off in the distance. We climbed down the steps into the basement and my dad shut the door and locked it. We started heading to the back when we all stopped dead in our tracks and silently stared at the back of the basement. In the shadows, standing there, was a man. He didn't say anything to us. He just stared back at us and giggled in the creepiest giggle I had ever heard. None of us could move because we were so scared of this stranger, and we couldn't leave because of the tornado. We had to just stand there in the dark with this creepy stranger. Once the tornado passed, we all ran out of the basement and into the house to call the police. The dispatcher said that our problem was low priority since all of the other officers were out helping the survivors. So my dad hung up and went back to the basement to confront the man. But when he went out there, the man was gone and never seen by us again. I like to call myself a storm chaser. Am I professional? No. But I get the biggest rush when I see that big, beautiful tornado rip apart a house. I love seeing destruction. I love the carnage that an F5 tornado can bring upon people. I like to show up to the sites where the tornado has destroyed, not to help save people, but to see the blood. One day, I'm out in my truck, around the area where I know a tornado will pass through, when I see a family bringing groceries into their house. I drive up to the house and strike a conversation with the dad, giving him a warning that a tornado should be coming today. The man asks me if I know where the tornado will be landing. I think any normal person would try to save lives and warn them to evacuate their house, but I lied and told them it will hit a town 20 miles away from them, so they shouldn't have anything to worry about. About an hour later, the tornado touches the ground. As I predicted, the beast starts heading the direction of the neighborhood where I had spoken to the man. I close my eyes and imagine the devastation that this tornado will bring to people, and I begin to get butterflies in my stomach. After some time, after the tornado is gone, I drive to that neighborhood, just as I thought. The neighborhood is in ruins. I get out of my truck and walk to the house of the family that I had spoken to. I begin lifting metal pipes and broken pieces of wood, and then I find them. They are all dead. Limbs are everywhere. Blood is everywhere. The wife's face is smashed in, and her brains are seeping out of her ears. But then, I hear a quiet voice. The husband is still alive, stuck underneath their refrigerator. He looks up at me and extends his arm. "Help me! Please help me!" I silently look down at him for a few minutes. He stares back with confusion of why I'm not helping him. I then squat down next to him. I look deep into his eyes and smile. Then I stand up straight, take a deep breath, turn and walk away. God, what a rush. The carnage was beautiful. I live in the countryside. I'm a 42-year-old man, but at the time of this story, I was 39. Being that I live in the country, I have much land. I used to ride horses all the time on my property until an accident left me paralyzed from the waist down. At the time, my younger sister was staying with me to help me as my caretaker. During a day in November, I remember watching TV on the couch. My sister had to run to the store to pick up groceries for dinner. She had been gone for roughly 20 minutes when I noticed the weather had changed drastically, and it began hailing outside. The TV started to get static on the screen. My animals were going crazy outside, and I pulled myself up to look out of the window, and there it was, a giant tornado right across my property a few miles away. I instinctively went to grab my wheelchair, and then remembered that my sister moved it into a different room earlier when I was laying on the couch. The tornado was rapidly getting closer, so I threw myself off the couch and landed on the floor. I started dragging myself to the bathroom with all the strength that I had. With each painful pull, I could hear the thunderous tornado coming closer and closer. I was about 10 feet from the bathroom when I heard the barn being torn apart right next to my house. I finally made it into the bathroom and threw myself up and into the bathtub. The tornado ripped apart my house while I was quivering in the tub. I laid in the tub, crying until my sister came home for what seemed like a year later. She ran into the bathroom and helped me out of the tub and into my chair. The tornado ripped off the side of my house, and the living room, where I just was gone. This story happened to my grandparents, but I've heard it so many times that I know what happened step by step. They were sleeping, and it was sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. They were woken up by the tornado warning that their small town had. My grandma was always the worry type, and Grandpa was always the stubborn and brave one. My grandfather told my grandma to stay in the house while he was going to go outside and unlock the basement on the side of the house. While Grandma was waiting, the house started shaking and the walls of the house were ripped apart. The next thing that happened was my grandma getting woken up by a firefighter. She was underneath a pile of rubble, and the firefighters were throwing things off of her to pull her out of the mess. Grandma just kept repeating, "Where's my husband? Where's my husband?" No one had an answer for her. A few days later, a police officer came into the hospital room to inform her that they found Grandpa. They found him a mile away from their house. Apparently, while Grandpa was outside unlocking the basement, the tornado sucked him up and launched him through the air. He died on impact when he smashed into the ground. I used to serve in the military when I was younger, and I've seen some horrible things, but this story is the worst thing I'd ever seen. I worked in a factory, and we deal with a bunch of highly combustible materials. It's very loud in the factory, with all the machinery running at the same time. One day I was at work, and everything was going like clockwork. Nothing unusual or different. When all of a sudden, the entire factory shuts down. It goes from unbelievably loud to silent. My supervisor comes running out of his office and screams, "Tornado!" We all freak out and grab onto something sturdy. The whole factory begins to rumble and shake. I start praying and crying, and then the walls of the factory begin to rip off, and I can see the tornado from the opposite side of the building. I'm holding onto this pipe with dear life. I see some of my coworkers losing their grip and getting sucked into the tornado. The combustible materials are getting banged around and they start to explode. Other coworkers are engulfed in flames. I can see their skin melting off of their bones as they scream. Pipes from the factory are flying everywhere, and I saw several men get impaled through their necks and legs and chest. It was a living nightmare. After only a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, the tornado passes, and I let go of the pipe that saved my life. The devastation was immense. There were 72 people working that day, and 6 of us went home to our families.